Hello friends, this is Sociology paper MA Part 1 Unit 4 and today's topic is Max Weber. The objective of this paper is to be familiar with Weber's academic and intellectual background and to study on social stratification existing in society. First, we will see the introduction part of it, in which we will see the life and work of Max Weber and his major works. Max Weber, 1864 to 1920, he born on April 21st, 1864 in Erfurt, Germany, in a wealthy family of lawyers and politicians. He studied law, political economy, philosophy and history in Heidelberg. He was PhD in law in 1889 and habilitation in 1892. He was appointed as professor in Freiburg, Heidelberg, Vienna and Munich. His major works are in 1904, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, in 1919, Politics as a Profession and Science as a Profession, and Economy and Society. Now we'll see Max Weber's intellectual background. Friends, you are already familiar with Durkheim and his works. Emil Durkheim and Max Weber are the two most influential and significant personalities of this discipline. Both of them reached the height of their creative careers just before the First World War. In spite of their differences, Durkheim and Weber have a great deal in common. They looked upon religion as a force of paramount significance in human life as well as the key institution for understanding social order. Weber had a very versatile mind. His comprehension ranged across economics, political science, sociology, anthropology, history and philosophy. His numerous publications are indicative of his wide span of interest and of his considerable achievement as a sociologist. Weber was born on April 21, 1864 in a family of Protestants who had been refugees from Catholic persecution in the past but had later become successful entrepreneurs. His mother had a very strong Calvinist background, while father was a typical German bourgeois politician. Growing up in a cultured bourgeois household, he met leading politicians and academicians in his house even at an early age. In his youth, he was greatly influenced by his uncle, the historian Hermann Baumgartner, and his aunt Ida, who was his mother's sister. Unlike his father, who treated young Weber with patronizing authoritarianism, the uncle regarded the nephew as an intellectual peer. The influence of his aunt was equally strong. Weber studied at the University of Berlin and for a while worked as a barrister at Berlin courts. During the years at the Berlin University, Weber was enormously productive. His PhD thesis on commercial societies in the Middle Ages in 1889 was followed by a postdoctoral thesis on Roman agrarian history, which earned him a university teaching position at Berlin University. In 1896, he was appointed as a professor of economics at the University of Heidelberg. By 1896, the Weber home became a gathering ground for Heidelberg's academic intellectuals, and Weber, though still quite young, came to be regarded as the central figure among the wide network of contemporary scholars. His wife, Marion, provided him an intense intellectual and moral companionship. However, Weber's career was constantly interrupted by the bits of mental depression that he suffered. He grew up in an atmosphere of great tension and strife generated by the unhappy married life of his parents. He was continually beset by psychic torment. His inner tension stemmed largely from his early family life and stultifying political atmosphere of the Kaiser's Germany in which he lived and worked. Weber's promising career and intellectual life seemed to come to an end in July 1897 when he had a violent clash with his father and as a consequence suffered a complete nervous breakdown. In 1903, after much traveling and treatment, his intellectual forces were gradually restored and he entered a period of very active academic life. He once again managed to join editorship of a leading German social science journal and re-established contact with friends and academic colleagues he had lost during the years of his illness. Weber subsequently traveled through America for over 3 months and was deeply impressed with the characteristics of American civilization. His major works on the Protestant ethic, emergence of capitalism, and on bureaucracy show traces of the influence of his stay in America. After returning to Heidelberg, Weber resumed a full writing career. His intellectual output was now again astonishing. He wrote on methodology of social sciences. The Protestant Ethics was published in 1905. There followed in 1906 several important studies on the political developments in Russia after the revolution of 1905. In 1908 and 1909, he did a major empirical study in the social psychology of industrial work and of factory workers. In these years, he also participated actively in academic conventions and spoke at political meetings. In 1910, he became the co-founder of the German Sociological Society. He remained its secretary for several years and decisively influenced its initial program of study. Before World War I, Weber's home in Heidelberg became the center for richly stimulating and varied intellectual gatherings. During the years of First World War, he wrote a number of major newspaper articles and papers on political issues. During these years, he also worked on sociology of religion and did a comparative study of the religions of China, India, and ancient Judaism. When the World War over, Weber, in accord with his nationalist convictions, volunteered for service. As a reserve officer, he was commissioned to establish and run 9 military hospitals in the Heidelberg area. He retired from this position in the year 1915. Earlier, in 1918, Weber had for the first time in many years lectured for a full semester at the University of Vienna. A year later, he accepted a call to the University of Munich, where he began to lecture in the middle of the year. His well-known lectures, Science as a Vocation and Politics as a Vocation, were first delivered to an audience of students at Munich in 1919 and bear all the marks of his attempt to define his major political and intellectual orientation in a time of revolutionary upheaval. Weber was working on his major work on economic and social history when he suddenly took ill and died on June 14, 1920. In all circumstances, he remained fiercely independent in his political stand, refusing to bend to any ideological line. He had a first-rate legal mind and was thoroughly versed in the history and philosophy of law. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of ancient and modern history. Now we'll see concepts of class, status, and power of Weber. The work of German sociologist Max Weber represents one of the most important developments in stratification theory since Marx. According to Weber, a class is a form of social stratification. In Weber's view, our position in a stratification system reflects some combination of class, status, and power, and in fact, the rankings on these 3 dimensions often tend to coincide. At the same time, these dimensions of stratification may operate somewhat independently in determining a person's position. Class is defined by property. The ownership of property confers a real power on the employer, and lack of ownership of property confers a real powerlessness on the worker. Weber's definition of class was in terms of a group of people who shared the same typical chance for a supply of goods, external living conditions, and personal life experiences, insofar as this chance is determined by the power to dispose of goods or skill for the sake of income in a given economic order. In short, property and lack of property is the basis for all class situation, and class is a type of socio-economic category. Weber used the term class to refer to people who have a similar level of wealth and income. While Weber agreed with Marx on the importance of the economic dimension of stratification, he argued that the actions of the individuals and groups could not be understood solely in economic terms. Weber differed only marginally from Marx when he defined as a class a category of men, number one, have in common a specific causal component of their life chances insofar as, and two, this component is represented exclusively by economic interest in the possession of goods and opportunities for income, and three, it is represented under the conditions of the commodity or labor market. He was even fairly close to Marx's view when he stated that class position does not necessarily lead to class-determined economic or political action. He argued that communal class action will emerge only if and when the connections between the causes and the consequences of the class situation become transparent. Marx would have said, when a class becomes conscious of its interests, that is, of its relation as a class to other classes. Yet, Weber's theory of stratification differs from that of Marx in that he introduced an additional structural category, that of status group. Classification of men into such groups is based on their consumption patterns rather than on their place in the market or in the process of production. Weber thought Marx had overlooked the relevance of such categorization because of his exclusion attention to the productive sphere. Now we'll talk about status. Weber used the term status to refer to people who rank the same in prestige or lifestyle. In contrast to classes, which may or may not be communal groupings, status groups are normally communities which are held together by notions of proper lifestyles and by the social esteem and honor accorded to them by others. Linked with this are expectations of restrictions and social intercourse with those not belonging to the circle and assumed social distance towards inferiors. In this typology, we again find Weber's sociological notion of a social category as dependent on the definition that others give to social relationships. A status group can exist only to the extent that others accord its members prestige or degrading, which removes them from the rest of social actors and establishes the necessary social distance between superior status groups and low status groups. That is, the caste society in Indian society. Status in a class and in the status group may coexist in the modern capitalist society. A significant change is also evident in our society, where those from propertyless and low status groups have been aspiring to rise up in the political sphere and are threatening the position of those who have enjoyed higher status and privileges for centuries. In short, status means a rank order of desired behavior and traits and value-oriented behavior. According to Max Weber, status refers to the social determination of life chances. It is based on social honors. Status situation refers to that part of a person's life chances which are decided by the social esteem in which he or she is held. Such esteem might be positive or negative. Most of the time, class and status are defined by the distribution of goods and services, not by their production, as pointed out by Marx. Weber suggests that the ethnic groups in particular offer their members a social esteem that is not available to them in the wider hierarchy, and it is a source of esteem open to everybody in the group. The other important criterion for closure of status groups is educational qualification. Groups professionalize by demanding higher qualifications. This leads to consistent inflation of qualifications. If everyone has an equal degree, then advancement will require. Unlike class, status groups are conscious of their common position. Empirically, there are fairly high correlations between standing in the class and in the status order. Especially in capitalist society, the economically ascendant class will, in the course of time, also acquire high status. Yet, in principle, economically rich and poor people may belong to the same status group. At certain times, an economically weak element may exercise considerable influence and power because of its superior status. Generally, as much post-Weberian analysis of American politics has shown, political behavior may at times be influenced by men who are fearful of losing their status or who bridle at not having been accorded a status they think is their due. Such influence may be as powerful as class-determined modes of political behavior. In Weber's view, every society is divided into groupings and strata with distinctive lifestyles and views of the world, just as it is divided into distinctive classes. While at times status as well as class groupings may conflict, at others their members may accept fairly stable patterns of subordination and superordination. With this twofold classification of social stratification, Weber lays the groundwork for an understanding of pluralistic forms of social conflict in modern society and helps to explain why only in rare cases are such societies polarized into the opposing camps of the haves and the have-nots. He has done much to explain why Marx's exclusively class-centered scheme failed to predict correctly the shape of things to come in modern pluralistic societies. Now we'll learn about power. Power is the ability to exercise one's will over others. According to Weber, the class and status are a phenomena of the distribution of power within a community. He contends that the pursuit of social power is essentially an attempt to acquire social honor. Weber also mentions that power does not always lead to social honor. However, he acknowledges that those who are considered honorable by society often gain social power or have a greater chance to do so. In regard to the analysis of power in society, Weber again introduces a pluralistic notion. Although he agrees with Marx in crucial respects, he refines and extends Marx's analytical scheme. For Marx, power is always rooted only in the last analysis in economic relations. Those who own the means of production exercise political power either directly or indirectly. Weber agreed that quite often, especially in the modern capitalist world, economic power is the predominant form. But he objects that the emergence of economic power may be the consequence of power existing on other grounds. For example, men who are able to command large-scale bureaucratic organizations may wield a great deal of economic power, and even though they are only salaried employees. Weber understands by power the chance of a man or a number of men to realize their own will in communal action even against the resistance of others. He shows that the basis from which such power can be exercised may vary considerably according to the social context, that is, historical and structural circumstance. Hence, where the source of power is located becomes for Weber an empirical question, one that cannot be answered by what he considers Marx's dogmatic emphasis on one specific source. Moreover, Weber argues men do not only strive for power to enrich themselves. Power, including economic power, may be valued for its own sake. Very frequently, the striving for power is also conditioned by the social honor it entails. According to Weber, power relates to the ability to command resources in a particular domain. Economic power then is the ability to control material resources, to direct production, to monopolize accumulation, to dictate consumption. Societal power includes economic power, social power, legal or political power, and so forth. Although the control of these domains of resources usually go together, they represent different mechanisms of power and are conceptually distinct. In conclusion, Weber discusses class in the context of social stratification. Class is one dimension of the social structure. Social status or social honor is another. Both are significant contributions of social difference. Now, friends, there are questions based on the topic. First question is, what is the relationship between class and status in Weber's work? Second, evaluate the Weber's concepts of class, status and power as three distinct bases of stratification. And third and last, briefly outline the intellectual background of Max Weber. Now we will see theory of social action, which was proposed by Max Weber, and the objectives are to study the Weber's concept of social action and to understand the types of social action. Now, introduction and meaning of social action. Friends, Max Weber in his book Economy and Society, Volume 1, pages 4 to 7 and pages 22 to 31, outlines and discusses his definition of social action and social relationship. Prior to defining social action, Weber states that sociology is a science concerning itself with the interpretive understanding of social action and thereby with a casual explanation of its course and consequences. Weber defines action that is social as those actions insofar as the acting individual attaches a subjective meaning to his behavior, be it overt or covert, omission or acquiescence. Action is social insofar as its subjective meaning takes account of the behavior of other and is thereby oriented in its course. From this, there appear to be three key aspects to defining a human action as social. First, meaningful to the actor. Meaningful to the actor, presumably things that are understandable or are of concern to the social actor, perhaps as a result of experiences, values, and interests. The fourfold classification of types of social action gives a guide to types of meaning. Consider others. Other social actors are necessarily involved in order for an individual action to become social action, and they must be explicitly considered by the social actor, whether positively, negatively, or neutrally oriented some direction or purpose in the action. While Weber does not initially mention subjective consciousness, this concept becomes important in his later consideration of what forms of action are socially meaningful and what are not. For example, he notes that it is not always clear what is unconscious and seldom fully self-conscious, and there are varying degrees of self-consciousness. Max Weber conceived of sociology as a comprehensive science of social action. Every unit of human behavior, whether of smiling at someone, shaking hands, or exchanging blows, could be understood in the terms of the subjective meanings that individuals attach to their actions. Social action refers to the behavior oriented towards the other humans, for it would evoke response when it is received and understood by the other persons. Series of such actions taking place between two or more individuals manifest prevailing social norms and values, and they occur within a given socio-cultural context. One way that social action can be understood is by considering what not social action is. Among these are actions such as the following. Reactive behavior, where there is no subjective meaning and generally merely reactive imitation, is not socially meaningful. Traditional behavior, although this may cross the line between what is meaningful and not, and almost automatic reaction to habitual stimuli. Psychological processes may not be meaningful, at least not discernible by those other than a psychologist. Mystical experiences are not ordinarily social, since they are entirely personal, and contemplation and solitary prayer. Psychic or psychophysical phenomena such as fatigue, habituation, memory, status of euphoria, and variations in individual reaction times or precision. Non-social if overt action directed toward inanimate objects. What about action directed towards non-human animals? Example, walking a dog. Natural actions such as a mere collision of two cyclists, although subsequent actions such as insult, blows, or friendly discussion are ordinarily social meaningful. Common actions in a crowd psychology, mass action, these might be socially meaningful in some circumstances but tend to be more habitual, impulsive, cheering or booing at a sporting event, or clapping after a music performance, example, after every solo in jazz, or automatic or reactive. Limitation may be meaningful or not, depending on its form and results. Weber argues, and this is difficult to analyze, imitation may be merely reactive, or it may be a learning process that has subjective meaning associated with this. The reactive learning of language by children is of this sort, and it is difficult to determine the extent to which subjective meaning is involved. Purely effectual behavior is also on the borderline. Effectual action is one form of social action, but if the activity is merely reactive or habitual, it may not be so meaningful in each circumstance. All of the above, that means whatever just now told, show the difficulty of defining social action, since the dividing line between what is meaningful or considered differs by individual and situation. While Weber fairly clearly distinguishes between what is social action and what is not in analytical terms, any study of social action requires careful empirical study and sympathetic understanding by a sociologist. Now, characteristics of social action. Social action is not isolated. Social action, in order to be really social, has to be oriented to the behavior of other animate things as well. Worship before an idol or a worship in a lonely place is not a social action. It has to be oriented to the behavior of animate beings as well. In every kind of action, even overt action is social in the sense of the present discussions. Overt action is non-social if it is oriented solely to the behavior of the inanimate objects. Result of cooperation and struggle between individual and members of the society. Mere contact with human beings is not a social action. It should deal with the cooperation and struggle between various individuals. A crowd that may collect at a place does not necessarily indulge in the social action unless it starts behaving with one another. Social action is not identical with the similar actions of many persons, or action influenced by others. A meaningful understanding with other action or action of others. Mere contact with others or actions in relation to others are not a social action. Social action should have a meaningful understanding with the social action of others. In every type of contact of human beings has a social character. This is rather confined to cases where the actor's behavior is meaningfully oriented to that of others. Weber argued that to explain an action, we must interpret it in terms of its subjectively intended meaning. A person's action is to be explained in terms of the consequences he or she intended purpose, rather than in terms of its actual effects. Of the two are often at variance. A subjectively intended meaning is also a causal explanation of the action, in that the end in view is a cause of present actions. For Weber, it is important that action is defined in terms of meaningfulness, and sociological analysis must proceed by identifying the meaning that actions have for actors. Now, types of social action. 4 major types of social action are distinguished in Weber's sociology. These are ideal types, in that each is analytically distinct from the other, are average forms of behavior, are conceptually pure and sociologically important. The 4 types of social actions are: number 1, goal-oriented rational action. In this action, both goal and means are rationally chosen. Individuals may engage in rational action in relation to a goal. The actor conceives his goal clearly and combines means with a view to attaining it. Weber does not explicitly state whether that action in which the actor chooses unsuitable means because of the inaccuracy of his information is non-rational. He defines rationality in terms of the knowledge of the actor. Individuals may engage in rational action in relation to a value, as the brave captain who draws himself with his ship, or a woman committing sati at her own will. The actor in these cases is acting rationally in accepting all the risks, not to obtain an extrinsic result, but to remain faithful to his or her own idea of honor. Individuals may engage in purposeful or goal-oriented rational action. Their rational action may be value-oriented. They may act from emotional or affective motivations, or finally, they may engage in traditional action. Purposeful rationality, in which both goal and means are rationally chosen, is exemplified by the engineer who builds a bridge by the most efficient technique of relating means to ends. Second type is value-oriented rational action. Value-oriented rationality is characterized by striving for a substantive goal which in itself may not be ration, say the attainment of salvation, but which is nonetheless pursued with rational means, for example, ascetic self-denial in the pursuit of holiness. Value-oriented rationality is characterized by striving for a substantive goal which in itself may not be rational, but which is nonetheless pursued with rational means, example, ascetic self-denial in the pursuit of holiness. These are social actions where the end or value may be pursued for its own sake. In such actions, there is a self-conscious formulation of the ultimate value governing the action and consistently planned orientation of its detailed course. Examples of this form of social action include religious or spiritual actions, pursuit of ethical ends, or pursuit of artistic or aesthetic goals. For these actions, it is frequently the case that the action itself may mean both pursuit of and accomplishment of the end. For example, group prayer or attendance at a memorial service may create the goal of spiritual peace for the individual, performing music for others, or creating a work of art to be publicly displayed may be a means by which an artist achieves aesthetic goals. Weber mentions actions such as personal loyalty, duty, a religious call, whereby human action is motivated by the fulfillment of such unconditional demands. Third type is affective or emotional action. Affective or emotional action is anchored in the emotional state of the actor rather than in the rational weighing of means and ends, as in the case of participants in the religious services of a fundamentalist sect. Affective or emotional forms of action determined by the actor's specific affects and feeling states. Social actions among family members, friends, and intimate partners are examples of these. However, for Weber, it is important to note that these may often be somewhat unconscious, for example, uncontrolled reaction to some exceptional stimulus. This action is the result of emotional impulses and feelings. An example of affectively determined action is when a person acts in such a way that he achieves the immediate satisfaction of a need for joy, pleasure, pain, revenge, etc. The affective action is dictated immediately by the state of mind or humor of the subject. A father shouting the child for misbehavior, or a football player giving a punch to his opponent as he loses control over himself are instances of affective action. Here, the action is defined not with reference to a goal or system of values, but by the emotional reaction of an actor in a given set of circumstances. Fourth type is traditional action. Traditional action is dictated by customs, by belief becomes habitual or second nature to an actor who need not imagine a goal or be conscious of a value or be stirred by an immediate emotion. He simply obeys reflexes that have become entrenched by conditioning. Traditional action is an expression of a custom or traditional behavior. Behavior is a dull reaction to some tradition or custom and often takes the form of settled habits. Most of our habits and routine actions are examples of traditional action. Affectual or emotional and traditional action may not be as central to Weber's analysis of social action in that they can become value or instrumentally rational or can become unconscious. But If conscious release of emotional tension, it becomes rationalized. Weber was primarily concerned with modern Western society in which, as he saw it, behavior had come to be dominated increasingly by goal-oriented rationality, whereas in earlier periods it tended to be motivated by tradition, affect, or value-oriented rationality. His studies on non-Western societies were primarily designed to highlight this distinctive Western development. This classification of types of action serves Weber in two ways. It permits him to make systematic typological distinctions, as for example between types of authority, and also provides a basis for his investigation of the course of Western historical development. Weber was primarily concerned with modern Western society in which, as he saw it, behavior had come to be dominated increasingly by goal-oriented rationality, whereas in earlier periods it tended to be motivated by tradition, affect, or value-oriented rationality. His studies of non-Western societies were primarily designed to highlight this distinctive Western development. Earlier, theorists had attempted to conceive of major historical or evolutionary tendencies of Western society in structural terms. Weber responded to similar concerns by proposing that the basic distinguishing marks of modern Western man were best viewed in terms of characteristic shifts in human action that are associated with characteristic shifts in the social and historical situation. Weber's focus on the mutual orientation of social actors and on the understandable motives of their actions was anchored in methodological considerations which account for much of the distinctiveness of his approach. 5. Understanding social action. Weber provides some methodological guidelines to how sociologists can understand social action. Among the factors he mentions are: there may be less sociological certainty in terms of understanding the sources of errors and confusions. Since the sociologist thinks rationally, it may be somewhat more straightforward for the sociologist to understand rational than irrational action. For the latter, it may also be more difficult to verify circumstances and consideration made. Value rational action may be more difficult to understand sociologically, since the sociologist may have different values and ends than other social actors. Religious or spiritual considerations are an example of this. Emotional or affective forms of action may be more understandable in that most individuals have similar emotional reactions, even though they may hide them or not express them in behavior and action. Methodologically, Weber argues that it is convenient to treat all irrational, affectively determined elements of behavior as factors of deviation from an ideal type. That is, obtain an understanding of the rational course of action, and from this it may be possible to determine errors, deviations, ambiguities, and uncertainties that led to irrational action. For Weber, individual social action is sociologically significant since it is oriented towards others and involves subjective meaning on the part of the actor. Weber expands the meaning of social action by connecting actions of one individual with actions of others. The result is to move beyond the study of individual social action to defining and analyzing social relationship. In conclusion, Weber's focus on consciousness and meaning have provided a very useful way to consider how social action can be considered. This always forces the sociologist to understand the actor, consider the position of the actor, and study how meaning exists in any social action. By connecting social action to social relationship and arguing that these develop patterns which become regularized, Weber is able to integrate action and structure and provide an explanation for social structures ultimately rooted in individual social action. Weber's approach that actors define their own conduct seems worthy of recommendation to sociological study. Friends, questions on this topic: examine the Weberian theory of social action, illustrate the typology of social action and explain its importance, and briefly discuss Weber's understanding of social action. Now we'll see Max Weber's The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. The introductory remarks are: his major work was based on the question, why did modern capitalism initially occur in the West and not in other parts of the world? The book Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, which was published in 1904, is a study of the relationship between the ethics of ascetic Protestantism and the emergence of the spirit of modern capitalism. In this book, he emphasized the role that this rationalized religious beliefs played in motivating the business who developed capitalism in the 17th and 18th centuries. Weber's casual argument for the emergence of capitalism. Why does capitalism develop in Western Europe at a particular time? What is the relationship between economic life or material production and cultural life or beliefs? Spirit of capitalism, set of beliefs characterizing individual social actors of a given social formation, not identical with greed, egoism, avarice. Spirit of capitalism, ethos is equal to ethical percepts of the conduct of life, leading principle of capitalism, economic acquisition as a means in itself, compared with Marx. Where does this principle come from? Ethical principle coming from religious life or ethics. Ethical principle has constraining properties leading to calling. Ethical principle is universal, applies to everyone. Ethical principle excludes double standards. The modern spirit of capitalism sees profit as an end in itself and pursuing profit as virtuous. Weber's goal is to understand the source of this spirit. He turns to Protestantism for a potential explanation. The spirit of capitalism. Calvinism, 16th and 17th century. Ethics of salvation through inner self-discipline requires a systematic methodical check upon one's own salvation stand, a rational organization of one's own existence, continuous action or work, continuous accumulation, continuous efficiency or profitability. Consequences: accumulation of capital and investment, the rational conduct of life on the basis of the concept of calling. Ethics becomes autonomous and effective while religious orientation diminishes. Calvinists believe in predestination, that God has already determined who is saved and damned. As Calvinism developed, a deep psychological need for clues about whether one was actually saved arose, and Calvinists looked to their success in worldly activity for those clues. Thus, they came to value profit and material success as a signs of God's favor. Once capitalism emerged, the Protestant values were no longer necessary and their ethic took on a life of its own. We are now locked into the spirit of capitalism because it is so useful for modern economic activity. This is an example presenting a rational systematization of man's relation to the divine and its impact on the transformation of society. The rationalization of capitalist society, ethics of rationalization, life becomes rationalized, economic relationships become rationalized, that is oriented toward efficiency, profitability, calculation, accumulation. The capitalist social order is based on rationalized enterprise, which means rational capital accounting, appropriation of the physical means of production and disposal property, freedom of the market, absence of irrational limitations on trading, rational technologies, mechanization and calculation, calculable value, calculable law, calculable adjudication and administration, free labor, persons legally able and economically compelled to sell their labor, commercialization of economic life, commercialization of ownership, speculation based on commercialization, and rationalization of capital society leads to the growing relevance of the bureaucracy. Now, consequences of the rationalization of capitalist society: rationalist techniques of organization of life, growth of a social group, and instrument of legal domination. Weber advocates that it is not sociologically important to conclude whether capitalism is good or bad, human or anti-human. Rather, sociology must have to study the essence of capitalism. It must make an attempt to understand various forms of capitalism present in the history of different societies. It must have to analyze the similarities and differences between various forms of capitalism. It must have to look into the essential preconditions responsible for the growth of the emergent nature of capitalism that Weber defines as legal rational capitalism. Sociology must have to look into the factors responsible for the growth of legal rational capitalism in West and search for the presence or absence of these factors in East, where capitalism is yet to make its appearance. All these attributes sociologically important to study capitalism sufficiently indicate Weber's commitment to historical method, interpretive method, ideal type, and Verstehen method. Weber asserts that the essence of capitalism is an ideological stimulation to a large number of people to accumulate capital at a given point of time in a given situation. The spirit of capitalism is not unique to modern society, hence it is difficult to distinguish modern society from pre-modern societies. In all the societies of human history, there is necessarily present the drive for mobilization of capital or wealth. Therefore, the history of humanity has witnessed the presence of various forms of capitalism in time and space. They are so divergent that it is possible to study all of them in every possible detail. Thus, he looks into the major forms of capitalism, constructing an ideal type about them. He advocates that tribal communities fighting warfare against each other were greatly engaged in mobilizing capital or wealth. There is no reason to conceptualize tribal societies as pre-monetized system where the search for capital is potentially absent. They constitute primitive communism. In case of traditional feudal societies, the feudal lords were profits-seeking. The imposition of taxes on the tenants and demand for high degrees of return from the production made by the tenants and cultural obligation on part of the tenants to offer tributes to their lords during ceremonial occasions, all these are early forms of capitalism, are different from legal rational capitalism, as in this type of capitalism both labor and enterprise conformed to the legal rules either to make profit or to determine the value of their wages respectively. Both labor and enterprise are legally bound to relate themselves to the interest and the objective of the enterprise. In order to examine why legal rational capitalism developed in societies of West, Weber gets into the fundamental prerequisite for the growth of legal rational capitalism. He believes that essential requirement for the growth of any new form of economy or a motivational current that is ignored by materialistic thinking drives political order. Values are as important as substance or infrastructure for the growth of capitalism. He takes interest in the study of the unique values and makes an attempt to establish correspondence between the values of Protestantism and the demands of capitalism. He also makes an attempt to understand how different other world religions radiate different kinds of values and their respective negotiation with the demands of capitalism. Such an attempt helps him to understand the nexus between economy and religion. Self-discipline is an important feature of Protestantism. It means one should reutilize his regular course of action. One must have to give sufficient time to his vocation. One must have to conform to the laws to regulate his activities. No amount of success should give man a sense of fulfillment. The drive for success, glory from the time of his birth until the time of his death should be there. One should be a workaholic to enjoy the work, meanings of his life, and self-discipline ordinarily demands that right thing should be done at right time because time is money. It should not be wasted and should be used in a very systematic, rational, and meaningful manner for human glory. Protestantism believes that after his life there is no other life Therefore, life is short. It is predestined and man should be reminded of the scarcity of time. A true Protestant will be restless. He must have to feel miserable, or more he achieves, more is yet to be achieved. This orientation keeps reminding man time and again that he must have to get into enterprise, he must have to dedicate himself to work, and time is short, life is purposive, responsibility of man is to transform this world into the paradise of God in which his contribution should be visible. The values of Protestantism strongly correspond with the demands of capitalism in a well-defined manner. It is an inwardly religion that advocates that life is short and one must be duty-bound to make the best use of time. Capitalism demands that both labor and enterprise should be committed to work. People should be judged on the basis of their performance. Protestantism believes in the principle of equality. Capitalism evaluates the performance of the individuals. The best performers are given opportunity to go for upward mobility, which offers them new status and social recognition. Thus, the demands of capitalism are sufficiently endorsed by the values of Protestantism, for which capitalism developed in West. Protestantism advocates that one must learn to cooperate with each other. One must respect the rules and laws meant for collective well-being, organized activities, and direct man to manifest his duties. Capitalism demands division of responsibilities, harmonic work culture, interdependency among the other people conforming to law, and law offers guidelines that have to occupy which position and perform what kind of roles. Therefore, the demands of capitalism is addressed by Protestant values effectively. This theory of Weber is being tested in various empirical grounds. J.J. Rustow finds out that growth of capitalism in contemporary Japan is the outcome of their defeat in the Second World War, which gave way to a great national disgrace and compelled all the people to stand together, driven by the spirit of nationalism and patriotism, which gave way to the growth of capitalism. Gunnar Myrdal advocates that centuries-old colonial rule, when gives way to freedom, national pride stimulates people to accept new values and ideology to go for economic development. Richard Bentix advocates that cross-cultural contacts provide stimulation for economic development and growth of capitalism. A testimony to that is the growth of capitalism in Germany that borrowed ideology from France and expertise from America and technology from Britain. Lipset says that for the growth of capitalism, stimulating ideas and support may come from the political structure, family and kinship, internal organization patterns, along with the values of religion. Therefore, for the growth of capitalism, the bearings of multiple forces must be taken into consideration. Neil J. Smeltzer also supports this argument. Weberian theory of Protestant ethics and spirit of capitalism may be criticized on empirical grounds, but the ethos of this theory was to prove that how the history of the institutions is highly divergent. It offers sociology an alternative methodology useful to study the dynamic character of study of human life and social history. It might thus seem that the development of the spirit of capitalism is best understood as part of the development of rationalism as a whole and could be deduced from the fundamental position of rationalism on the basic problems of life. In the process, Protestantism would only have to be considered insofar as it had formed a stage prior to the development of a purely rationalistic philosophy. But any serious attempt to carry this thesis through makes it evident that such a simple way of putting the question will not work, simply because of the fact that the history of rationalism shows a development which by no means follows parallel lines in the various departments of life. Now, student friends, questions here. Only one question. Evaluate the Weber's theory of Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. The next topic is Max Weber, theory of authority and power. The introductory remarks are: the term authority refers to power that has been institutionalized and is recognized by the people over whom it is exercised. Sociologists commonly use the term authority in connection with those who hold legitimate power through elected or publicly acknowledged positions. Power is the ability to exercise one's will over others. To put it in another way, whoever can control the behavior of others is exercising power. Three main modes of authority, that is, claiming legitimacy. First is traditional authority. In a political system based on traditional authority, legitimate power is conferred by custom and accepted practice. A king or queen is accepted as a ruler of a nation simply by virtue of inheriting the crown. For the traditional leader, authority rests in custom, not in personal characteristics, technical competence, or even written law. Traditional authority was predominant in pre-modern societies, which is based on the belief in the sanctity of tradition of the eternal yesterday. It is not codified in impersonal rules, but is based on a belief in the sacred quality of long-standing traditions and in the legitimacy of those who have been called upon to exercise authority. Persons like parents, priest, or king inherit such authority sanctioned by family or religious traditions. They enjoy a kind of personal authority by virtue of their inherited status. Their commands are legitimate in the sense that they are in accord with custom. Second is charismatic authority. The term charismatic authority refers to power made legitimate by a leader's exceptional personal or emotional appeal to his or her followers. Charisma lets a person lead or inspire without relying on rules or traditions. So long as people perceive a leader as having qualities setting him or her apart from ordinary citizens, that leader's authority will remain secure and often unquestioned. Rests on the appeal of leaders who claim allegiance because of their extraordinary virtuosity, whether ethical, heroic, or religious. Charismatic authority examples: the charismatic political leader, the charismatic TV personality, growth of a star system in the media industry. The term charisma will be applied to a certain quality of an individual personality by virtue of which he is set apart from ordinary men and treated as endowed with supernatural, superhuman, or at least specifically exceptional powers or qualities. These are such as are not accessible to the ordinary person but are regarded as of divine origin or as exemplary, and on the basis of them, the individual concerned is treated as a leader. Characteristics of the charismatic prophet: extraordinary in terms of either life or teachings. He or she has penetrated to the deepest reality and is in touch with ultimate values. Their revelation or expression does not seem to be born of themselves but of God. Hence, their authority is not their own but is a gift of God. Characteristics of charismatic prophets: tend not to come from intelligentsia or upper classes, often have no formal training for tasks, represent a break with tradition and direct message. What does a charismatic leader or prophet offer people? A new vision of life's possibilities, that is, a new sense of meaning, new social structure, break with the oppressive ways of the present by recovering past golden age or creating a new utopia, exhilaration of creating something new, something to believe or commit oneself to. Legal rational authority. Power made legitimate by law is known as legal rational authority. Leaders derive their legal rational authority from the written rules and regulations of political systems such as constitution. Generally, societies based on legal rational authority, leaders are thought to have specific areas of competence and authority. Legal rational authority based on rational grounds and anchored in impersonal rules that have been legally enacted or contractually established. This typology of various forms of authority relations is important on several counts. Its sociological contribution rests more especially on the fact that Weber, in contrast to many political theorists, conceives of authority in all its manifestations as characteristic of the relation between leaders and followers rather than as an attribute of the leader one. Weber's discussion of authority relations, why men claim authority and feel they have a legitimate right to expect willing obedience to their command, illustrates his use of the ideal type as an analytical tool and his classification of types of social action. Weber distinguished three main modes of claiming legitimacy. This type is rational legal authority, which has increasingly come to characterize hierarchical relations in modern society. Traditional authority, on the other hand, which predominates in pre-modern societies, is based on belief in the sanctity of tradition of the eternal yesterday. It is not codified in impersonal rules but inheres in particular persons who may either inherit or be invested with it by a higher authority. Charismatic authority finally rests on the appeal of leaders who claim allegiance because of their extraordinary virtuosity, whether ethical, heroic, or religious. It should be kept in mind that here, as elsewhere in his work, Weber was describing pure types. He was aware that in empirical reality, mixtures will be found in the legitimation of authority. In conclusion, this typology of various forms of authority relations is important on several counts. Its sociological contribution rests more especially on the fact that Weber, in contrast to many political theorists, conceives of authority in all its manifestations as characteristics of the relation between leaders and followers rather than as an attribute of the leader alone. Although his notion of charisma may lack rigorous definition, its importance lies in Weber's development of the idea that the leader derives his role from the belief his followers have about his mission. Now, student friends, questions on this topic. First, discuss the Weber's concept of authority and its various types. Second, explain Weberian typology of authority in terms of legitimacy and obedience. Third, critically evaluate Weber's concepts of power and authority. And last and fourth, define concepts of authority, power, and domination, explaining their importance in human relationships and systems of social interaction. Max Weber, bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is the formal organization of the administrative system of large-scale enterprise, that is, government, military, economic, religious, and educational. Basic characteristics of bureaucracy. Max Weber proposed different characteristics found in effective bureaucracies that would effectively conduct decision-making, control resources, protect workers, and accomplish organizational goals. Max Weber's model of bureaucracy described through a simple set of characteristics as: number 1, division of labor. Specialized experts are employed in each position to perform specific tasks. By working a specific task, people are more likely to become highly skilled and carry out a job with maximum efficiency. Unfortunately, the fragmentation of work into smaller and smaller tasks can divide workers and remove any connection they might feel to the overall objective of the bureaucracy. The jurisdictional areas are clearly specified, and each area has a specific set of official duties and rights that cannot be changed at the whim of the leader. This division of labor should minimize arbitrary assignments and of duties found in more traditional structures in which the division of labor was not firm and regular, and in which the leader could change duties at any time. Second, hierarchy of authority. Bureaucracies follow the principle of hierarchy. Each position is under the supervision of a higher authority. Each office should be controlled and supervised by a higher ranking office. However, lower offices should maintain a right to appeal decisions made higher in the hierarchy. This should replace a more traditional system in which power and authority relations are more diffuse and not based on a clear hierarchical order. A bureaucracy is founded on rational legal authority. This type of authority rests on the belief in the legality of formal rules and hierarchies and in the right of those elevated in the hierarchy to possess authority and issue commands. Authority is given to officials based on their skills, position, and authority placed formally in each position. Third, written rules and regulations. Ideally, through rules and regulations, a bureaucracy ensures uniform performance of every task. Through written rules and regulations, bureaucracies generally offer employees clear standards as to what is considered as an adequate or exceptional performance. Procedures provide a valuable sense of continuity in a bureaucracy. Individual workers will come and go, but the structure and past records give the organization a life of its own that outlives the services of any one bureaucrat. Rules should be specified to govern official decisions and actions. These formal rules should be relatively stable, exhaustive, and easily understood. Fourth, employment based on technical qualifications. Within a bureaucracy, hiring is based on technical qualifications rather than on favoritism. Performance is measured against specific standards. Officials are recruited based on qualifications and are appointed to the office. People are compensated with a salary and are not compensated with benefits such as rights to land, power, etc. This should supplant more particularistic ways of staffing found in more traditional systems where officials were often selected due to their relation with the leader or social rank. Benefits such as land, rights, etc. were also common ways of compensating people, which was to be replaced by a general salary matching qualification. Fifth, clear career paths. Employment in the organization should be seen as a career for officials. An official is a full-time employee and anticipates a lifelong career. After an introduction period, the employee is given tenure, which protect the employee from arbitrary dismissal. This should supplant more traditional systems in which employees' career paths were determined by the leader and in which employees lacked the security of tenure. This bureaucratic coordination of the actions of large numbers of people has become the dominant structural feature of modern forms of organization. Only through this organizational device has large-scale planning, both for the modern state and the modern economy, become possible. Weber's interest in the nature of power and authority, as well as his pervasive preoccupation with modern trains of rationalization, led him to concern himself with the operation of modern large-scale enterprise in the political, administrative, and economic realm. Bureaucratic coordination of activities, he argued, is the distinctive mark of the modern era. Bureaucracies are organized according to rational principles. Offices are ranked in a hierarchical order, and their operations are characterized by impersonal rules. Incumbents are governed by methodical allocation of areas of jurisdiction and delimited spheres of duty. Appointments are made according to specialized qualifications rather than ascriptive criteria. This bureaucratic coordination of the actions of large numbers of people has become the dominant structural feature of modern forms of organization. Only through this organizational device has large-scale planning, both for the modern state and the modern economy, become possible. Bureaucratic organization has shaped the modern polity, the modern economy, and the modern technology. Bureaucratic types of organizations are technically superior to all other forms of administration, much as machine production is superior to handicraft methods. The bureaucrat has official obligations, is integrated in a hierarchy, has official competencies, is selected and named, has a career, he is disciplined, has bureaucracy as his or her profession, and office holding is a vocation. Yet Weber also noted the dysfunctions of bureaucracy. Its major advantage, the calculability of results, also causes depersonalization. It is difficult to deal with individual cases. Is bureaucracy really efficient? red tape, bureaucratic routines, Parkinson's law, work expands to fill the time available for its completion, informal groups or arrangements within formal organizations, impersonality, alienation, de-skilled workers, tight control over every aspect of work, etc. It contributes to the cold and uncaring feeling associated with modern organization. Weber also noted the dysfunctions of bureaucracy. Its major advantage, the calculability of results, also makes it unwieldy and even stultifying in dealing with individual cases. Thus, modern rationalized and bureaucratized systems of law have become incapable of dealing with individual particularities. Weber argued that bureaucratization of modern world has led to its depersonalization. Weber's views about the inescapable rationalization and bureaucratization of the world have obvious similarities to Marx's notion of alienation. Both agree that modern methods of organization have tremendously increased the effectiveness and efficiency of production and organization and have allowed an unprecedented domination of man over the world of nature. They also agree that the new world of rationalized efficiency has turned into a monster that threatens to dehumanize its creators. But Weber disagrees with Marx when the latter sees alienation as only a transitional stage on the road to man's true emancipation. Elements of bureaucracy. There is the principle of fixed and official jurisdictional areas, which are generally ordered by rules, that is by laws or administrative regulations. The regular activities required for the purposes of the bureaucratically governed structure are distributed in a fixed way as official duties. The authority to give the commands required for the discharge of these duties is distributed in a stable way and is strictly delimited by rules concerning the coercive means, physical, sacerdotal, or otherwise, which may be placed at the disposal of officials. Methodical provision is made for the regular and continuous fulfillment of these duties and for the execution of corresponding rights. Only persons who have the generally regulated qualifications to serve are employed. In public and lawful government, these three elements constitute bureaucratic authority. In private economic domination, they constitute bureaucratic management. Bureaucracy, thus understood, is fully developed in political and ecclesiastical communities. Only in the modern state and in the private economy, only in the most advanced institutions of capitalism. Permanent and public office authority with fixed jurisdiction is not the historical rule, but rather the exception. This is so even in large political structures such as those of the ancient Orient, the Germanic and Mongolian empires of conquest, or of many feudal structures of state. In all these cases, the ruler executes the most important measures through personal trustees, table companions, or court servants. Their commissions and authority are not precisely delimited and are temporarily called into being for each case. The principles of office hierarchy and of levels of graded authority mean a firmly ordered system of super and subordination in which there is a supervision of the lower offices by the higher ones. Such a system offers the governed the possibility of appealing the decision of a lower office to its higher authority in a definitely regulated manner. With the full development of the bureaucratic type, the office hierarchy is monocratically organized. The principle of hierarchical office authority is found in all bureaucratic structures, in state and ecclesiastical structures, as well as in large party organizations and private enterprises. It does not matter for the character of bureaucracy whether its authority is called private or public. When the principle of jurisdictional competency is fully carried through, hierarchical subordination, at least in public office, does not mean that the higher authority is simply authorized to take over the business of the lower. Indeed, the opposite is the rule. Once established and having fulfilled its task, an office tends to continue in existence and be held by another incumbent. The management of the modern office is based upon written documents, the files, which are preserved in their original or draft form. There is therefore a staff of subaltern officials and scribes of all sorts. The body of officials actively engaged in a public office along with the respective apparatus of material implements and the files make up a bureau. In private enterprise, the bureau is often called the office. In principle, the modern organization of the civil service separates the bureau from the private domicile of the official, and in general, bureaucracy sees official activity as something distinct from the sphere of private life. Public monies and equipment are divorced from the private property of the official. This condition is everywhere the product of a long development. Nowadays, it is found in public as well as in private enterprises. In the latter, the principle extends even to the leading entrepreneur. In principle, the executive office is separated from the household, business from the private correspondence, and business assets from private fortunes. The more consistently the modern type of business management has been carried through, the more are these separations the case. The beginning of this process are to be found as early as the Middle Ages. It is the peculiarity of the modern entrepreneur that he conducts himself as the first official of his enterprise, in the very same in which the ruler of a specifically modern bureaucratic state spoke of himself as the first servant of the state. The idea that the bureau activities of the state are intrinsically different in character from the management of private economic offices is a continental European notion, and by way of contrast is totally foreign to the American way. Office management, at least all specialized office management, and such management is distinctly modern, usually presupposes thorough and expert training. This increasingly holds for the modern executive and employee of private enterprises in the same manner as it holds for the state official. When the office is fully developed, official activity demands the full working capacity of the official, irrespective of the fact that his obligatory time in the bureau may be firmly delimited. In the normal case, this is only the product of a long development in the public as well as in the private office. Formerly, in all cases, the normal state of affairs was reversed. Official business was discharged as a secondary activity. The management of the office follows general rules which are more or less stable, more or less exhaustive, and which can be learned. Knowledge of these rules represents a special technical learning which the officials possess. It involves jurisprudence or administrative or business management. The reduction of modern office management to rules is deeply embedded in its very nature. The theory of modern public administration, for instance, assumes that the authority to order certain matters by a decree which has been legally granted to public authorities does not entitle the Bureau to regulate the matter by commands given for each case, but only to regulate the matter abstractly. This stands in extreme contrast to the regulation of all relationships through individual privileges and bestows of favor, which is absolutely dominant in patrimonialism, at least in so far as such relationships are not fixed by sacred tradition. Max Weber viewed these bureaucratic elements as solutions to problems or defects within earlier and more traditional administrative systems. Likewise, he viewed these elements as parts of a total system which, combined and instituted effectively, would increase the effectiveness and efficiency of the administrative structure. The bureaucratic structure would go a greater extent, protect employees from arbitrary rulings from leaders, and would potentially give a greater sense of security to the employees. Additionally, the bureaucratic structure would create an opportunity for employees to become specialists within one specific area, which would increase the effectiveness and efficiency in each area of the organization. Finally, when rules for performance are relatively stable, employees would have a greater possibility to act creatively within the realm of their respective duties and subtasks, and to find creative ways to accomplish rather stable goals and targets. In short, bureaucracy implies a hierarchy of graded positions. Members are stratified and placed in terms of their qualifications, specializations, and services. They carry out differential duties, exercise differential power, and enjoy differential rewards. Occupants of different positions from the topmost official to the lowest in the hierarchy are allocated with different duties and obligations, power and privileges. All of them know where they stand in relation to each other and how they are expected to behave. There exists in every bureaucratic organization a rigid code of conduct, formal rules and regulations which influence the interpersonal relations, role expectations, and behavior of the incumbents of various positions. According to Weber, bureaucratic coordination of activities is the distinctive mark of modern era. Students' questions on this: discuss Weber's views on the bureaucratic system of organization. Second, examine the nature and significance of bureaucracy according to Max Weber. Now, the last topic on Max Weber is contribution to the methodology of social science. Max Weber was exposed to 4 different methodological traditions used in the field of sociology, directly or indirectly, prior to his contributions to sociology. Most important of them are idealistic method developed by Kant and Hegel, positivistic method used by Auguste Comte and Saint-Simon J.S. Mills, Saint-Simon and J.S. Mills, comparative method of Emile Durkheim, dialectical materialistic method of Karl Marx. The idealistic method, adopted by Kant and Hegel, advocated that the difference between statement of fact and statement of value is necessarily mitigated through the application of human mind, meaning when statement of value explains what it ought to be, statement of fact indicates what it is. Consistent application of mind serves and dichotomy between the two. Hegel believes that mind is exclusively rational, hence using his rational mind taking the help from rational thought, man gets engaged in various kinds of discoveries, innovations to create and recreate human history. The knowledge about the reality is real and rational comes out of application of human mind. This approach is known as rational approach and idealistic approach as well. The positivistic approach advocates that knowledge about the reality can be procured not by application of human mind but by observation, personal experience and experimentation. It is the sensory organ of human body that sees the reality. Hence, knowledge about the reality should be understood through the application of empirical or positivistic method. The fundamental concern of positivism is to extend the methodology of natural science to the field of sociology. It advocates that both the disciplines should be using scientific method to study the reality in its every possible aspect. Weber is not convinced either with empirical arguments or with the rational approach to study the reality. He advocates that behind every possible reality there is present natural causalities, body of values, forms of actions, source of motivations. Therefore, every reality is a mixture of multiple attributes that cannot be studied either from rational standpoint or from empirical standpoint. Weber asserts that every possible reality being multidimensional, no branch of knowledge can ever be able to study every possible dimension of reality. Max Weber criticizes the sociological commitment to the methods of science on the one hand and the application of the methods of science in the natural science on the other. He makes a distinction between the method of science and the philosophy of science. The methods of science are the steps, procedures used by the scientists to conduct research. The methods of observation, separation, and verification are used in scientific research. To its contrast, the philosophy of science is not concerned about the scientific procedures and methods, rather it is concerned about the spirit and ethos of science. It believes that scientists, being a professional body of people, maintain objectivity while conducting a research. They maintain value neutrality and use relational rationality or substantive rationality while conducting research. Spirit of science is not engaged in compartmentalization of knowledge, dividing them into natural versus social science or nomothetic versus ideographic disciplines. Knowledge is absolute. No possible branch of knowledge is absolutely objective or subjective. Subjectivity and objectivity are intertwined and combined together explain the essence of reality. Weber believes that sociology should not make an attempt to go for first-rate generalizations to study facts as facts, rather it must have to use subjective meanings to objective reality, following spirit of science rather than the methods of science. To Weber, mind always imposes a pattern on the sensory organs of the basis of which one explains the reality. Mind and matter values and realities are complementary to each other. Thus, effective negotiation between the both is the fundamental concern of sociological research. Weberian sociology makes an attempt to establish interlinkage between the both, considering that sociology is concerned with subjective understanding of objective realities. Weber believes that collectivity doesn't have any life to think, feel or perceive. Weber believes that sociology should not make an attempt to go for first-rate generalizations to study facts as facts, rather it must have to use subjective meanings to objective reality, following spirit of science rather than the methods of science. To Weber, mind always imposes a pattern on the sensory organs on the basis of which one explains the reality. Mind and matter, values and realities are complementary to each other. Thus, effective negotiation between the both is the fundamental concern of sociological research. Weberian sociology makes an attempt to establish interlinkage between the both, considering that sociology is concerned with subjective understanding of objective realities. Weber believes that collectivity doesn't have any life to think, feel or perceive. The basic unit of social structure is social action. The concern of sociology is to understand the meanings associated with the action of the actor than mechanically studying action and its consequence using the methods of natural science. Sociology being concerned with problem of understanding, he introduces Wehrstein method into the fold of sociology. He divides Wehrstein method in two types: direct observational Wehrstein, indirect explanatory Wehrstein. In case of the first method, a researcher can look into the action of a body of people and predict the meaning behind their action and what they are going to do next. To its contrast, indirect explanatory Wehrstein method should be used to understand the historic situations. The second method goes beyond observational method, offering scope for the use of statistical method, historical method, comparative method, and explanatory method into the field of sociology. The essence of reality can be addressed through sociological research, but not the totality of reality. Sociology must have to admit its limitations while conducting research on a given theme to have comprehensive understanding about it. The method of Wehrstein is not an alternative to other methods in sociology. It is only a supplementary to the other methods according to Weber. He believes that Wehrstein method may help a sociologist to gather sufficient information about a given reality, and the information collected may be used by the researcher to construct hypotheses about the same problem to research on the same theme. Weber believes that Wehrstein method explains the goal of sociology and sociological research. To achieve this goal, it must have to use a well-defined methodology, and that methodology is as open and elastic, defined as ideal type. Ideal type is a conceptual abstraction helping a sociologist to understand the essence of reality. The distinction between ideal type and actual type speaks about the intellectual dichotomy between Marx and Weber. When Marx believes that capitalism is real, Weber believes that to a sociological research. Hence, A sociologist requires a mental frame of reference to understand the essence of real capitalism in the real place. Collecting inference from the writings of others and adding to it his own observational judgments about capitalism, one can develop a mental frame of reference or a model or ideal type about capitalism to understand the essence of real capitalism, implying that ideal type is a consciously developed model by sociologist to guide his research. Sociology can develop ideal type on the descriptive concepts using in the field of other branches of social science. Weber finds out that the concepts like capitalism, democracy, authority, bureaucracy, religion are loosely defined in the field of political science, economics and anthropology. Centering around them, a sociologist can develop an ideal type, and using it he can study various forms of capitalism, etc. This approach will facilitate sociology to go for comparison, on the basis of which generalizations can also be made. This will introduce interdisciplinary approach in the field of social sciences, helping other branches of knowledge to take the help of sociological approach to authority or bureaucracy to research on the same theme in different other situations. Weber is the first scholar to conceptualize that sociology is not a prescriptive discipline, rather it is a descriptive and interpretative discipline. A sociologist necessarily pursues a vocation. He should not be guiding either social rebellion nor should operate as the high priest of the society. Rather, the concern of the sociologist is to conduct and guide research in order to study the essence of the reality in a value-neutral and rational manner. Students, questions expected on this topic. 1. Discuss ideal type as a methodological tool in a sociological research. 2. Explain Weber's ideas on science as a rational activity, establishing value judgments of universal validity. 3. What is meant by the term Verstehen? How do the sciences of culture provide for comprehension of human behavior? Explain. And 4th and last, critically evaluate Max Weber's contribution to sociological methodology. Thank you.